In this video, we're looking at how to make the most out of the trading reports we send to YouTube members throughout the week. The video has come at the request of members saying there's a lot of information there. Can you help us understand how to identify the best trading opportunities in the market? So we're going to do that with the 6 reports. YouTube members get an access to a website where they punch in a passcode and then it opens up these reports that you can see on screen. We start off with the first report, but you can jump ahead to the chapters if you need to understand the others. First report is the top 10 Momentum Daily. Now, all of the reports share the same common factor, which is you can toggle through to see previous reports on the dates. So jumping through to a different date, you'll see, okay, here's a report from that trading day. We'll work on the most recent one because that came out yesterday afternoon at about 2:15 when members get access to it. The rest of the world, they get shared this report at about 9 o'clock the following day. Pretty straightforward on the headings, but we're going to start on the left-hand side. Momentum rank, you can see by pressing on it, you can change the order. If it's alphabetical, it'll work on that. So sorting the columns just like Excel. Code or ticker, BXN, and then the company name, straightforward. Momentum score, this is where we start to get questions, okay? What is the momentum score? A common use across the globe for momentum traders is to use a 12-month relative strength index brought to us by William O'Neill decades ago. Great metric, and we love to use it, and we apply it to filters that we'll discuss in another video. But here we use a quarterly momentum. Why do we use a quarterly momentum? In Australia, our market is a little bit different in the sense that we have so many mining companies and they can turn hot and cold faster than most industrial companies do and long-term thematics. So we know from studying the US books of the US and Australia from the industrial side of things, when we had the buy now, pay later theme, that was a multi-year momentum trade. Yes, there were times where it came in and out of favor and there were shorter term trades along the way. But the mining companies ebb and flow much faster than that. We can have 2 or 3 spurts of lithium, uranium, or cobalt within 1 year. And if we're using the RSI of 12 months, what that's going to do is it's not actually going to respond quickly enough for us to identify there is an opportunity here for good momentum trading on the ASX. That is why we use a quarterly momentum. Is it standardized within 0 to 100? No. We'll cover that in another video because we're bringing out another level to members in level 2 that really uses a lot of information that shows up in the momentum score. But if we standardize it to cap out at 100, that's washed out and filtered out. So it's important to keep the raw momentum score. That's what we do here. You've got the green line showing that that's the darkest green. That's the highest score for the day, filtering down to the lowest. Okay, just like Excel, and it's a tapered or a color shading mechanism. The weekly performance rank. Okay, this is share price performance, not momentum score, just the pure share price that's moved. You can see, well, the top performer here, MVP, they're up 76% for the week, and 4th place is just under 30%. Why isn't it ranked number 2? Okay. We've got the momentum score on the top 10 momentum companies, but the performance rank, we look at everything on the ASX that meets a market capitalization and a market value or traded market value filter. This just throws out the rats and mice that trade from 0.5 cent to 1 cent and blow all the numbers out. So this is the rank within that universe of the companies that qualify for that trading day. The weekly performance rank and the weekly performance score, they're tied together. Moving over to the quarterly performance rank, same thing, we're using the same universe, and then we're looking at their quarterly performance rank, their share price performance over the quarter. Okay, massive movements. We've got 2nd place, ATH. Yes, they're up over 300% for the quarter, and the lowest out of the top 10 momentum companies for this day was up 45% over the quarter. That gives you an idea of how they've moved. But remember, it's a momentum score where it's stacked towards the most recent movements and does sort of drag out towards the late part of the quarter to encapsulate a whole quarter, but heavily weighted towards the more recent performances. Then we move into days since hitting the top 30 momentum. A lot of questions come from, well, why are there so many companies at 45? That seems like a coincidence. Yes, it is. We cap it out at 45 because without drilling into the depths of the mathematics, that was the best number. And it seems to confuse a fair few people as to why they're all showing up at 45. It means that they're perennial strong performers. They've been in the top 30 for more than 45 sessions. They first showed up here more than 45 sessions ago. And if you look at those charts, well, we've got number 5 here, ranked number 5, PAR. Have a look at that chart. You'll see why. And this is what we want to be identifying. Charts like this, opportunities like this, where they are the best performers. As one trader once said to me, for a company to go up 400%, it normally has to go up 100% first. And that's, well, to go up 100%, as you'll see here, they've probably ended up in the top 10 or top 30 at some point. So we're going to consistently see these companies show up as being leaders and coming in and out. That's where we move into the launchpad. The question we get is, well, what is the launchpad? If we think about it this way, not all companies that show up in the launchpad become momentum leaders, but all momentum leaders have been on the launchpad. So we know that it's a broader universe. It will encapsulate more companies. Not all of them will be leaders, but we're going to find our leaders in there first. And what the difference we see between these dates tells us, well, there's a bit of a lag or a speed of the momentum that's happening. This one, well, what are we looking at? MVP, the days since hitting the launchpad, that was 40 sessions ago. But the days since hitting the top 30 momentum was only 3 sessions ago. That tells us that there's about 37 sessions we could have analyzed MVP after it hit the launchpad, assess what the peer group was doing, how strong the sector was there an opportunity here? Did it meet the fundamental filters that we were after? Was there a coil? Was there a compression? Was there a breakout or some sort of technical setup that I could have traded once I narrowed it down? Plenty of time to analyze it. Is the risk reward ratio right? How does it sit in my portfolio? All of that, 37 sessions. What is difficult is when we see something like, it's not here in this report, occasionally we will see the day that it hits the launchpad was only 0, 1 or 2, 3 days in between hitting the launchpad and then becoming a top 30 momentum leader. That in itself is an episodic pivot and a video in itself to understand how to trade episodic pivots. But that's what happens when you have a massive news event and the share price jumps 20, 30, 40, 50% on the day. That can happen, and that will be the rare occurrence where it shows up. Well, what about this one here? Days since hitting the launchpad, it's not there, but it's 4 days since hitting the top 30 momentum. What can happen is that it could enter the launchpad more than 45 sessions ago and more than the calculations show. So then it drops off. And that's where it becomes, let's see if we can find this one. Here's a good example. Number 7, ESR. How does it happen that it hit the top 30 momentum 45 sessions ago, but only hit the launchpad 21 sessions ago? How is that possible? Well, it's not really. We cut the timer off at 45 days for days since hitting the launchpad. And then if it exceeds that, it's kind of like this, the clock resets. And what we'll see with ESR, if we look at that chart, we're going to see that it would have entered the launchpad and then dropped out of the launchpad. But after that period, it's hit the top 30 momentum and then it's come back into the launchpad. So quite often this can happen with the steps. It happened consistently with, where is it, PAR. We saw it consistently. It would come into the launchpad, then become a momentum leader, stay a momentum leader, drop out of the launchpad, then sort of taper off. Sometimes it could still be a solid momentum leader, but it tapers off in the momentum and then re-hits the launchpad and then reignites and jumps the ranks in the top 30 momentum once again. We'd love to find those companies, and that's ideally what we're looking for. You've studied any model books like the video that Gary and I have recorded, or those of William O'Neill last 40, 50 years, you'll know that those perennial performers have that kind of burst, pause, consolidate, burst, pause, consolidate. And that really shows up in between these numbers if you pay attention and really delve into it. Return since hitting the launchpad, okay, that's pretty straightforward. This number of sessions ago, what's the share price performance? That's the return since hitting the launchpad. That's the daily report. Members get it at 2 o'clock or thereabouts, and the rest of the world gets it at 9 o'clock. And there's also a podcast if you want to hear that, listening in the car. What are these companies? How many days since hitting the launchpad? What are the returns like? You tend to get a bit of a feel for monitoring this report every day, how good the momentum opportunities are in the market at a time. In the next level of membership that we're releasing, we actually drill down to that to give it an actual number and a gauge to show how good the opportunities are. And it's quite surprising. It's not when we expect it, looking at the overall index, I should say. Moving into the second report, this report comes out every single Monday. As the name on the left-hand side suggests, it is the 3 best momentum stocks in the 3 strongest sectors when we look at the ASX 300. People ask why the ASX 300. If we go out beyond it, the averages just completely destroy it and we end up with massively lopsided numbers in the material space and then tiny numbers in the others. So the top 300 is a good universe that a lot of fund managers in Australia use for their own trading universe. The date function, very much the same. The drop down, that's just telling us it's Monday. So you choose the different dates. Most recent Monday, well, that was the 3rd. Sector momentum rank, 1, 2, 3 or 3, 2, 1, your choice. What it's going to do is just surface the companies, or the sectors, I should say, that have ranked the best. For the top 300 companies, if you haven't seen this, the market is broken into 11 different sectors as defined by GICS. Going back to 1999, we'll save the definition. We've got a whole video on that as well and why it does and doesn't work. Within those 11 groups or those 11 sectors, there are different numbers of constituents. Here in Australia, we have a massive amount of mining companies, and not just in the ASX 300, not just in the All Ords, but a huge amount on the index as a whole. We don't have very many utility companies. And that's part of the reason why utilities are often ranked highly. And we're going to look at this right now. If we choose the utilities sector, tick on it, make it turn green, we're going to see the top 3 momentum ranked utilities companies in the ASX 300, AGL, APA, OIG, as classified by GICS externally. Well, the momentum scores, that's not that compelling. It doesn't really inspire me to go and find a trading opportunity there. But how is it that these poorly ranked, relatively poorly ranked utility companies can come together to be ranked number 1? It's because of that small number of constituents within the ASX 300 that are classified as utility companies. And they're generally more defensive than the rest of the market. So if the market falls, they tend to fall less with a lower beta, getting into a different thread here. But the point is that small number of constituents, they don't need to outperform the market very much. They just need to hold the midline. And what can happen is something like 3rd rank here, materials with a huge number, they can be ranked exceptionally poorly, even though they're the best performers. And I'll use an example here that we have seen multiple times throughout the year of 2023, 2024. Material companies can include something like lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper. We can have great thematics that are running exceptionally strongly, and they're filling up the top 10 momentum companies on the day. That last report that we just looked at can be full of these battery minerals, critical minerals, and shooting the lights out. But we could come to this next report and see the materials doesn't even rank in the top 3. How is that possible? It's because that large number of mining companies or material companies on the ASX, you could have the top 10 full of the best performing companies, but then you could have 5 times the amount of companies' materials that might be things that aren't performing. Coal, could be gold, and it could be something like iron ore. Those companies can drag down the index. They can drag down the averages for the material space and keep it lopsided. So it is difficult in the Australian market. And this is why we look at the thematics that Gary and I look at on a Friday recording and the Thursday report that we'll get to in a second. But that's how we use this report. We understand these sectors are leading in general. We understand these are the top 3 performing companies from a momentum perspective with the highest momentum rate in that sector. Switching over to materials, we're going to see a higher momentum score for the top performers and a higher momentum rank. But the averages, the heavy bottom end of the material space, have a lower momentum score and then dragging it down. You don't need to look too far in the Australian market to find some bottom trawling mining companies. They're always there at some stage of the cycle. Now we move over to report number 2, or the Tuesday report. Fundamentally strong momentum leaders. Okay, staying within the universe of the top 300. And then we apply Mark Minervini's CP filters, just 2 of them. Now, Mark Minervini's volatility contraction pattern is a phenomenal trading strategy. We've got a whole video on that if you like, and a specific slide just on the CPA, which is the fundamental filters he applies when looking for volatility contraction patterns. Much harder to do in Australia. You end up with a very narrow universe. Just applying 2 of these filters, which from a growth perspective is what we're looking at, we've got revenue growth of 10% or more and earnings per share of 15% or more. Go and apply that to the Australian market and you end up with a very narrow universe quite quickly. Then if you apply a few other filters, there aren't many companies to choose from. So we understand why that narrows it. But we also understand that our best trading opportunities are normally not even profitable companies. They're miners, they're dirt diggers, and they provide us with the best opportunity. So we're happy for it. But how most people trade the US and international markets, because of the plethora of large cap companies, it's a different mechanism. Nonetheless, we apply those two filters on the ASX to get a narrow universe. Revenue growth of 10% or more, earnings per shares growth of 15% or more. Then we look at the ASX 300, okay, cross the two over, and what's left, we then rank them by their momentum scores that we've looked at previously. Here's where we end up with the top 15. Yes, it is possible to have less than 15. And finally, on the right-hand side, you can toggle through the dates. Tuesday report date. This report comes out on Tuesdays. You'll only have Tuesdays to choose from where you tick the boxes. Moving into the Wednesday report, the 3 best stocks in the Launchpad that come from the 3 strongest sectors. The picture in the background reminds you're looking at the Launchpad, but other than that, it's a similar structure to what we just looked at on the Monday report. The universe is still the top 300, and we're doing the same thing, ranking by Launchpad, ranking the sector by the Launchpad rank, and then alphabetically if you choose to rank it that way. Then we're looking at, okay, first place is still utilities. How is that possible? It's that small universe again. There's only a very small number of companies in the ASX 300 that are classified by the GEEX classification as utility companies. So it's a small universe. If they hug the average and the market falls, they're going to be a top performer. It's just how it happens. Then we have a look at the other spaces. Well, consumer staples. They're ranked number 2 on the Launchpad. Which companies are in there? Okay, we've got A2 Milk, Bega, and Ingham's. Interesting. Momentum score 5, 4, 0.6. Remember, we're not looking for the momentum score yet. This is where they show up before they become momentum leaders. This is just giving us a reference point. Some people like to know, has it shot out? Or I like to go for an underdog and find a lower momentum score, I should say. Energy, well, we've got Ampol, we've got Bannerman, and we've got Karoon and Lotus. They're the top ones in the energy sector for their Launchpad rank. Okay, that's how that report works, and the date toggle works the same. We've also got the buttons along the bottom, so we can move over to the Thursday report. This is probably the most famous report and the one that we get the most questions from because it has 2 parts to it. Those who have seen the daily report, this looks very similar. The colors are similar, the layout is similar, except now we have 30 companies to look at rather than the daily top 10 momentum. This list is shared with Gary Glover at about 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, the same time that members get access to it. Members can then drill through and say, oh, actually, I'd love to hear this company discussed in the Friday recording that ends up getting published later that afternoon. Could you please put in the momentum list? I'd love to hear ETM, DXB, and MEK. That'd be brilliant. And on the Launchpad, I'm really keen to hear what you think about James Hardie, Bapcor, and FPR. That'd be brilliant. Thanks. They comment, and then that ends up to the filtering that we look at, or the list that we look at in the Friday morning recording. Gary will often cover a lot of those companies, and then I'll throw them to him on the spot, and he'll have a quick assessment of the companies that haven't been covered from the members' request side of things. Same thing on the left. Okay, you've got the date function. Quickly, we'll run through these. Momentum rank, code and company name, straightforward. Yes, if you want, you can reverse the rank. Then momentum score. Okay, the dark green, that's the highest number, flowing down to the lighter green with the lowest ranks coming in at 30th. Weekly performance rank. Weekly performance. Well, weekly performance is the share price performance over the last week. How much is it up? 101%. Stellar performance. That's great. Some of them are down. Interesting. But that can and does happen. This universe, when we go for the ranking side of things, it's the companies that meet that same volume traded market volume, and then also market capitalization. Remember, we need to weed out those companies that trade at 0.5 cent and then move up to 1 cent and blow out the averages. So that can often be somewhere between 500 and 1,000 companies, depending on what's happening in the market at the time. That tells us about half of the market is hard to trade. But if you've ever looked down that far in the market, you'd know that. Moving into the quarterly rank, we're using that same system, that same filtering system, but we're looking at the quarterly performance. You'll see some of them up 620%, others are up 100%, a fair few in between that, and then some, 20, 30%, and some actually down for the quarter. How does that work? If you look at these companies here at the lower end with the negative performance for the quarter, but a good performance over the week, the quarterly momentum score is more heavily weighted to recent performances. It does encapsulate the last 3 months, but heavily weighted towards more recent movements. That helps us identify those leaders. So that's why you can have some odd numbers here that seem confusing, but they do stack up if you drill down into it. Days since hitting the launch, or since hitting the top 30 momentum. This report is run every day in the background, and the 45 is that cap that we've talked about. The numbers stop at 45. So if you've been in the list more than 45 days and sort of consistently staying in there, then you'll show a 45 number. This tells us that all of these companies here have been pretty solid performers over the last 45 days. They've been in the top 30 momentum. What happens when there's 18 days since hitting the launch pad? And actually, I'll just cover it. If there's a 0, if it's not here, if there is nothing in the pink column and there's no number, that tells us that today is the first day since hitting the launch pad, the top 30 momentum, I should say. So 3 sessions ago, ARU hit the launch pad, and then today, or the day of this report, it became a top 30 momentum leader. That short period of time, when it's less than, say, 5 days generally, it's normally an episodic pivot, or there's a large amount of news or some sort of external factor that is driving that movement. Could be a Trump announcement or some sort of news or Fukushima event, that kind of thing does move it. So episodic pivots, a whole other video on that in how to trade them, but you can identify the short numbers that you see in here. Generally, that's an episodic pivot. Then we're looking at days since hitting the launch pad. This is an odd one here. We've got 18 is less than 45. Yes, we did say to become a momentum leader, you need to show up on the launch pad first, but not everything on the launch pad becomes a momentum leader. Okay, how does that work? What's happened is BC8 will have entered the launch pad more than 45 sessions ago, dropped out of it because it's not, most companies don't stay in the launch pad very long. Drops out of it, but it's come up on our radar. It's in our shortlist and it's a company that we're going to be looking at. And then it became a momentum leader sometime after that. Clearly it stayed a momentum leader within that period for sort of 45 days, but then it has re-entered the launch pad. Okay, well, how does that happen? If you look at the charts of some of the best performers over the years, you'll see that they run in fits and spurts. We'll see that it powers up an explosive breakout, and then there's a consolidation, maybe a pullback or some sort of compression or contraction in time. It just retracts and then goes sideways or comes back slightly. Those companies, then if they move up they still might be a solid performer with a huge gain. They've had a strong performance over the quarter. They're still a momentum leader, but then they've just fizzled off in the last week or two. And then if they're in that consolidation and compression, they haven't moved very far, and then they start improving on the launch pad, that's where they can start moving up the ranks of the launch pad once again and re-enter the launch pad while they're still a momentum leader. And that kind of thing happens here with a launch pad. Days since hitting the launch pad is less than the top 30 momentum. Return since hitting the launch pad, okay, 18 sessions ago, this is how much it's gained since then. That one's pretty straightforward. Solid movements. These can be interesting charts to look at. Go back to 30, let's go back and try find the breakout of GCM. And this is, if we're looking at sort of the deliberate learning, deliberate practice, this can be a whole list of names to go through and try find, okay, well, where was the opportunity in there for me to trade this? How can I review my own trading setups? Now we move to the Launchpad code. When we're looking at the Launchpads, you can effectively ignore all of this information here, but for the rank. The reason being, it's hard to get this many companies into one sort of A4 screen size that we can put out and possibly share as a PDF as we used to be doing. So we can press it all into one. The ranks on the left-hand side also stack up with the Launchpad code and company name. Also on the right, it's just the filtering of the dates on the left, so you can ignore that. What shows up on the screen here is the important information. Launchpad code, rank number 1, Baby Bunting, all the way through to rank 30, LIN. Sometimes there are some Dunlops in the names. There can be corporate actions and that kind of thing that can throw the numbers out. But these are the Launchpad companies for that week, and then we scroll through them and try to identify the opportunity. Then what can be the most important part of the Friday recording is actually discussing the thematic that sits behind it. The thematic is not the sector. In the sectors, one example I like to use, and we've covered this in great detail in a whole other video, is that if you look at iron ore companies, you'll have BHP, Rio Tinto. Well, they're diversified miners and they're grouped in with a lot of the lithium companies. So there's just a mixture and confusion there to start off with. If you're trading BHP and Rio Tinto, you'll probably trade Fortescue Metals at the same time because they're in iron ore. However, the problem with GIX is that it's going to show you that, well, Fortescue Metals is actually a steel company. That's how GIX classifies it. And if you look at trading steel companies, you'll end up with Fortescue Metals plus all of the coal companies. If you've ever traded either iron ore companies or coal companies, you'll know that they're two very different commodities and they trade very differently, particularly when the spot prices are moving in different directions. So that's the problem with GIX and the limitations of sectors, but it's the best tool that that's the standard tool that the world uses. We created our own where we look at thematics. It's over 380 thematics where you'll have steel companies listed differently to coal companies and listed differently to lithium companies. They're the themes that we talk about in the Friday recording. Sometimes Gary will go through and say, well, look, there are 8 gold miners here. This is very interesting. Last time we saw this many companies in the launchpad, 2 to 3 weeks later, they were, most of them, or a lot of that same theme, were in the top momentum themes, top momentum 30, or the top 30 in the momentum, I should say. We've seen that time again. We've seen it with lithium multiple times. We've seen it with uranium. We've seen it with property trust, which was a surprise. And we've also seen it with gold multiple times. So if we see a theme light up the launchpad here on the right-hand side, generally it's 2 to 6 weeks until we see that theme over on the left-hand side. The rule of thumb, 6. When we see 6 companies from the same theme on the right-hand side in the top 30, that is a very solid indicator. We're going to take our time, drill down into that thematic, identify the leaders, apply our fundamental filters, mark our breakout points, and get ready to trade them. Because quite often they become some of the strongest themes of the year. So that is how we use the 30/30 report on a Thursday that is then transferred into the Friday recording. Members get the video as soon as it's uploaded. The rest of the world gets it after market close on a Friday. Finally, the last one, very similar to the report that we saw before. We're applying the same fundamental filters coming out of Mark Vinovin's CEPA methodology, and we're using the revenue growth of 10% per year and per annum, I should say, and then earnings per share of over 15%. Applying these 2 fundamental filters narrows down our universe. We're then looking within the top 300 companies on the ASX, the XKO. That Venn diagram, the overlap of the fundamental filters that are also in the XKO, then has our smaller universe that we rank and re-rank based on their launchpad rank for that day. And then we come up with the top 15. Yes, it is possible to have less than 15, generally not though. And on the right-hand side, you do have the dates to choose from when you toggle through them. Remember, these reports are shared with members as soon as the numbers have been crunched. They get access to the website, punch in their code, and can see these reports to use that for trading before close if they wish. Then we will have another level coming out soon, which we go into more detail about how to identify how strong are the momentum opportunities that are in the daily top 10 or the top 30. How does that compare to previous times in the past? Is it a good time for momentum traders, or is it actually quite hard? Am I alone in not getting the right opportunities? And what we found is it's amazingly surprising, and it's not what we'd expect when we look at the index and how it's performing, is when the best momentum trading opportunities are showing up. Unless we'll final out and say that, obviously, this is not advice, it's not a recommendation, go seek professional advice. And thank you for subscribing. Thank you for being a member. We appreciate your support.